As you know, we passed out earlier, we had Professor Booth pass out the cards to you that showed those C8 competencies. At this point, we've assigned each of your groups a particular competency to focus on for this. And so what we'll do is we'll just kind of go in order of the different competencies and have our panelists talk about, again, how they've seen those competencies play out from an experience-based point of view in their respective professions. And of course, they may touch on as well what they would see as what's sort of the defining features of these competencies. But we'll go ahead and just get started there from the top. So let's start with character, if that's okay, Jim, Bill, and Harold. As you think about the term character, and what that's meant, and what are some ways in which you've seen character displayed in your profession? How would you, how would you define that? What are some things that you've seen how character is displayed in your experience? So why don't we go ahead and start with Harold on this one, and we'll go to Bill, and then Jim, we'd like you to chime in with any other additional insights we have as well.
To me, character, and I don't know if you've seen the film of where I was interviewed. It starts with your word. My favorite uncle told me when I left to go to work in New York after graduating, always remember that your word is the most important thing. So character number one is your word, your honesty, what you stand for, and the ability to live a life that's within boundaries. But most importantly, to live up to your commitments. You sign a contract, you fulfill that contract. I've encountered people along the way that don't do that. One very famous one right now. It is the very essence of what you need to be a successful business person. Someone that people will want to come back to, will trust, and know that your word is good.
I think character is also how you portray the culture of your organization. As a leader, organizations tend to emulate people. And so if your organization has a culture, whether you define it or not, but once your culture is defined, then your character is your daily walk and how you live and breathe and exemplify that character. And I've been in one organization where we produced cards for people that had our values and our culture statement on the cards, and we encourage people when they're going to a very difficult meeting to lay that card down on the table, and where you can always have a glance at it, so you know that you don't compromise those values or that culture when you're trying to make decisions or when you're trying to lead the way. So yes, character is, as Harold said, I believe, is highly individual, but it also is a reflection of the culture of the organization.
Jim, anything that you'd add to that?
Yeah, to me, it's really about your own personal behavior. And I can remember when I was your age, about 50 years ago, and sitting out there. But, if you're sitting in your hole or your room and there's 5 or 6 of you in there, does anybody want to know what your opinion is? Are they interested in it? If they're not, maybe you need to work on your character. Because character is about values, the existence of values, what you were taught by your parents, your mentors, your grandparents, your friends, and then the actions you take on those values. When I got out of the Air Force, I worked for some contractors for 10 years, and I decided to start my own company. And I resigned, and about a week later, the president of the American Subcontractors Association called me and wanted to go to lunch. And so we talked a little bit, and I said, well, what do you need? He said, I don't need anything. We, subcontractors that he represents, we just want to know where you're going and what you're doing, because if you're going to start a company, they want to be a part of it. They want to help you to succeed. And the only reason they did that was not because of my skill and cunning, but it was because I had built a good reputation, and they realized and believed that I had good character. That's who people want to work with, people with good character.
Great, thank you very much. Appreciate that. Let's talk a little bit about communication then. Some of it embedded in your comments were things about even communicating, in terms of honest communication and values and things like that. If we think about communication, what does that mean, and how have you seen both good examples of communication and bad examples of communication? We'll go ahead and start with Jim on this one, then we'll move back that way.
Well, I'll give you an example. I mean, obviously communication is not just being able to write or speak a clear, simple message, but also to listen. And to listen not just to respond, but to listen to understand. But our delivery system as contractors, we're usually invited 4 or 5 of us on a select list, and we give general conditions and fee proposals, and then we're shortlisted to probably 4. And then we go have an interview with 10 strangers. And we have about 45 or 50 minutes, about as long as, I don't know how long the class is, but not very long, to convince them that they ought to hire our company to build their project instead of the 4 that are waiting out in the lobby. Okay? So if we are unable to articulate who we are and our values and what we're about, we're not going to get the project. I've even said to my people, we don't have to be the best builder, even though we aspire to be the best builder, but we have to be the best ones at convincing 10 folks who are trying to make a decision on who to hire. And it doesn't come down to your experience or your expertise or your charisma, it comes down to your character. Because inevitably when they call us and say, Jim, we've awarded you the job, I say, thank you, we're ready to go, we've got a good team. And then I ask them, why did you hire us? And inevitably, and I've heard them say these exact words, but they say it in different ways. Well, we just felt like we could trust your group. And that goes back to the character thing. Okay? I've had superintendents, the blue-collar guys, a lot of times they are the best superintendents in the world, but they never learned how to talk and communicate. We've had to train those folks so that when we go to interviews, because we take the estimator and the scheduler and the superintendent and the project engineer, and everybody has a part in it. And I've lost projects because my superintendent or even some of the others just couldn't talk, even though they were fantastic builders. So you must be able to communicate.
I think of all the 8 characteristics, communication may be the linchpin, because if you can't listen effectively and actively, become an active listener, and you can't translate that into some form of communication, then you can't convey your ideas. It's very difficult to lead if you can't convey the concepts and the ideas. I agree wholeheartedly with Jim about the listening side. Years ago, I had a behavioral coach that worked at one of the organizations where I was the chief operating officer, and she told me, she said, Bill, put weight up in the upper right-hand corner of any document when you sit down for a meeting. And I said, well, why wait? She says, ask yourself, why am I talking? And, by the way, I'll give you that tip too. Sometimes because learning to listen is a very important part of leading, because you're constantly processing information. And you've got to be able to, great leaders in my mind, listen actively and aggressively, and they learn how to pass that information along, whether it's written or verbal. And I will say that your body language is a form of communication too. So how you sit and listen attentively, I know from a personal standpoint, having to work on being attentive to other people and being an active, aggressive listener and looking them in the eye. And in your interviews you're talking about, I've been on the other side of the table a lot of times when we're selecting those people who are going to do business with them. When you see people's eyes kind of wandering around, they're not engaging, they're not sitting forward in their seat, they're not active, not actively listening, you get a sense that you're not communicating, you're not connecting. The other sort of tip I always look for in communication is the word co. It always means there's 2 people involved. So rarely are you communicating with yourself. So the idea that you've got to find that other person, it's not the other person's responsibility necessarily to get the message. It's your responsibility to make sure you get it conveyed. So communication to me is one of the most important of the 8 characteristics.
Well, ditto on what both of my fellow amigos have just said. I'm a pretty quiet person, and I listen. But when I speak, people do listen. And I think that it's a very important thing that Bill mentioned there. Communication is what it's all about. If you can't communicate, if you can't verbally and in writing communicate well with your audience, you're not going to get anywhere. Some of the heroes in architecture, some of the greatest architects, are the most incredible communicators I've ever met. There's no question of why they've been successful. because they can reach the audience. They can convince them that I will solve your problems for you. So great communication is very, very important. We had very, very talented architects that just would fall apart in front of an audience. When you go in for an interview, being considered for a large project, and there was one person in particular, in fact it was an Aggie, that would just turn wet all over with perspiration. We found, and I went through it as the first person, this great coach, and we sent every senior person in our office to this coach to basically rebuild them. It was a week-long communication course so that they could go in, and that guy does not sweat anymore in the presentations. He turned in to be the leader of our federal markets area, and has had a very, very successful career in the office. But it was all because going to this speaking coach. And to this day, if I were to see her in the room, I think I would break into a cold sweat. She was a real sergeant. You stood in front of a microphone that came down out of the ceiling, and you were filmed over and over and over for 5 days. I've never worn a light colored suit since that day. It's that very first one. It's interesting. It's everything, how you communicate and how you reach people and how you even look to them.
And we practice all this. We'll take the interview team and interview in front of some of the rest of our employees, and they will pick out things if somebody's pulling on their ear or fiddling with their pen, stop with the pen, A lot of simple little things like that. But when you are in that situation, the folks on the other side of the table, some of them intentionally try to intimidate you to see if you're going to fall apart. Because if you are, you're not going to build a $50 million job for them if you can't sit there and stand the heat. And the other thing, I think my amigos talked about, but be able to tell your story simply and clearly. I asked a fellow one time at church, we were talking, I said, well, what do you do? He says, I kill chickens all day. I said, what are you talking about? Well, he was in charge of a Pilgrim's Pride packaging plant, and that was his way of getting to the bottom line. Kill chickens. But Johnny Bench was on the ESPN last night. I heard him talking. They asked him, and I told my buddies this, what would your advice be to a young kid that wants to be a catcher? And he said, catch every ball they throw to you. It's that simple.
I would say, I think if there's any one thing where you are in your careers could do to improve your success, it is get some coaching and become very effective communicators. And don't pass up any opportunity to communicate, whether it's in your family, whether it's in your church, whether it's in your community. So people always say, well, I never get a chance to speak, or I never get a chance to express my ideas. Well, there's lots of chances to express your ideas. And it gets easier and you get better at it the more you do it. So now's the time to start. Don't find yourself like Harold's colleague, who was an accomplished professional and had never had the benefit of developing those skills. Because the best ideas left under a bushel basket will never reveal themselves.
Well, in building on that, Bill, you talked about sort of the best ideas, and you talked about, putting forth ideas, and there's a communication aspect to that, but there's also just the idea generation part as well, that creativity component. Let's talk about creativity just a little bit, and how you've seen that be beneficial for your careers, and why is it beneficial for leaders to be able to exhibit creativity? Bill, why don't I go ahead and start with you on this one? Talk a little bit about creativity.
Well, I think the misnomer about creativity is that there's a special group of people, often wearing black T-shirts and having lots of body art and piercings, that the creativity is left to. And that's not true. Creativity lives and rests in all of us. Every one of us has some degree of creativity. I think that you start with the premise there are no bad ideas. And this is sort of marries with other ones that are characteristics like collaboration. When you come into a forum to start to discuss new ideas, it's very important that that forum is open for everyone to express something. Creativity comes from a variety of different sources. Yes, there are people who have gifts and they're blessed, they're sort of uber creative, and they sometimes are the spark or the catalyst that brings creativity forward. But I think the big premise is creativity really rests in all of us. And creativity isn't just used to design buildings or create new products or launch new software. it's in business processes, it's in analytics, it's in what you're doing for us. This compass model requires a lot of creativity. So I think just understanding that every one of us has something to contribute from a creative perspective, and then having forums when you meet with others to bring those ideas out, bring them forward.
Harold, what did you say about creativity?
I agree with that. I find that creativity can come forward in many ways. It will come forward often in getting ready to go make a sales pitch. How creative you put that presentation together. So it's not just being able to sit down and draw an idea or to develop a new product. I love to brainstorm with people, pull a group of people together and brainstorm, and you've got to develop self-respect for each other, and it's amazing at the ideas and the things that can come out of the easygoing talking and brainstorming. So it will come forward both as, you know, sitting down and drawing as an architect, but it will also can come forward in how you go market a project.
Thank you. Jim?
Well, I should be third because contractors are not known to be very creative. But I'll tell you, when we get a project, we get everybody together after the team that has decided how they're going to build it and where the cranes are going to be and what type of cranes we're going to have and all. And they get the building plan together. Then we get everybody together, all the project managers, some of the superintendents, and we brainstorm like Harold said. And we look for new ideas. What can we do better? Why are we doing it this way? And it's amazing because we had a project a couple of years ago in the Plaza of the Americas, and there was 200. We were taking out the ice rink. This was in Dallas, and while both buildings are occupied, we took all that out, and there's 200,000 feet of stone that had to be chipped out, and all the dust and everything. We got really worried about doing that, and it was a $500,000 number to keep the dust down and chip it all out. Well, we got into a brainstorming session, and one of my young project managers said, "Mr. Thompson, why don't we just cover it all up? Why don't we not take it out?" And we the light bulb went off. We found a thinner stone. The architect had specified a thick stone that wouldn't have worked. We found a thinner one to go over the top of it, and we offered the owner $500,000 back just because of a creative idea from a young project manager. So you can get into a rut of doing it the same way all the time. That's why you as young people need to question when you go to work for a company. You know, ask them why. Why are we doing it this way? And they may not have a good answer because we've always done it that way before. You know, Grandma always made the pie this big because that's how big her pie pan was. Okay? So be open-minded. Are we okay on time?
Yes,
I've got one more example. Recently, we just won a $25 million job, and I think it's because of our creativity. Before, there were no plans, and it's a redo of an Admirals Club at DFW Airport, and we're going to meet with American Airlines, and they're a tough group, intimidating as well. And there were 5 of us. We weren't allowed to go in the Admirals Club ahead of time, but yet we had to talk about how we're going to build it. So. And I'm not an Admiral Club member, but one of my employees said, "Why don't we get a 30-day pass, costs $100, and we'll go in there and look around." We took pictures of the elevator egress signs that were in there, and we made a complete plan on a logistics plan about where our people would come and go, where we would put our materials. We had all of that on a PowerPoint, and the guys went to the interview. Of course, no one else had done that. And so we blew them away and got the project because of being innovative, creative, and forward-thinking.
Well, I think also in this world of high tech and everything being so easy to do in your iPad or on your computer, don't be afraid in creativity to be high touch. Grab big markers, use big sheets of brown paper, cut out pieces of paper, stand on top of chairs, look at things through a different lens, write with your left hand instead of your right hand, break your mindset. Don't be afraid to try new, disruptive behaviors to break through for ideas. Because we progressively, we're the most creative in our lives when you're about 3 or 4 years old. You ever see kindergarten kids? They don't worry about something or anybody laughing at them or whatever. You know, great story of a teacher going through and grading a paper, and I'm sure you've heard the story, and the young lady, the young girl that drawn it had colored the sky orange, and the teacher said, no, the sky's blue. And the little girl says, not my sky, it was at sunset. So, we are progressively over our time as we get older, society constrains us and brings us and tightens us down and tells us, be afraid of an idea, be afraid to be creative, don't say something, don't do anything, just play it safe, stay within the boundaries, stay in the, I'm going to tell you to be creative, you got to break some rules, you got to stand on top of chairs and look at things, you got to write with big markers, because that's the way you'll find that other side, that creative idea that'll come out.
Thank you. Well, one of the things that you brought up, all of you sort of had this embedded in your comments, but Jim was talking about particularly that creativity allowed you to basically have a leg up on the competition that allowed you to get certain projects and things. And so one of the other competencies that we have in the model is competition. So speak to that a little bit, if you will. Jim, maybe since I filled off your comment, why don't you go ahead and start and talk a little bit about competition and the role that plays in leadership.
Well, I can't remember when I haven't been competing for about everything I've ever wanted. From the time I came to A&M, we were competing, our outfit was competing with other outfits, who's going to be the best marching outfit, who's going to win General Moore. We're competing with each other, who's going to be the outstanding freshman, who's going to be the guide on bearer, and all the way through into the Air Force in pilot training, who's going to get their wings, who's going to get washed out, who's going to be #1 in the class so you can get the pick of your airplane. And the American enterprise system is based on competition. That's why America leads the world in innovation, because we are competing. My competitors, and I hate most of them, but they have made me better. They have made me work hard because they're good. And I say that tongue-in-cheek. They are really good at what they do, and they push us to be our very best. So the competition, there's 83 million of you millennials, okay? You've got a lot of folks to compete with, plus now, different than when I was your age, it's a world economy. You're competing with other countries' people your age as well. So it's even more difficult for you guys going forward as you compete with, as you go out and get projects or go to work for companies and what have you. The competition is always prevalent. And, there's a book I read, and it says, run the race so that you might win the prize, okay? I mean, it's biblical. That's what we're supposed to be doing. You don't always win the prize, but you're supposed to run the race with the intention of winning the prize, okay? And one of the hardest things that I had ever had to deal with and learn to get over in 48 hours was when we went into an interview, like I was telling you before, to win a job, and we knew that we blew it away. We hit every mark. We knew we were the best one, and yet we still didn't get the job. Okay? Why? Because it ain't fair sometimes. There's sometimes a brother-in-law in the group, okay? And you're not going to get the project no matter what. Even you could be the very best. So do you take your ball and go home, or do you get over it and get back in the game? And you know what you need to do.
I think competition's interesting because it's a level of awareness. And I'm always amazed when I work with organizations and they go in to compete for a job and they haven't done the research on their competitors. So that one, they might understand the hot buttons of the client, but they haven't really spent the time to understand the competitive set that they're out against. It's like no other place in the world would you ever enter into battle and not understand the competition. I think once you do understand that and you look for ways to neutralize it, my philosophy has always been raise the bar so high that the competitor can't get over it, rather than constantly trying to figure out ways to go to fall to the depths of where they may take it. Because you may have a competitor that lacks some of these other values like character. You may have a competitor that prices it so low they're buying an opportunity in the marketplace. But if you're raising the bar as high as you can raise it, you're aware of all the issues, you've prepared yourself to go into the competition, whatever it is, and you've done everything you can do. Sometimes you lose and you just have to walk away from it and say, I didn't leave anything on the practice field. I did everything I could possibly do. But I think an understanding of your competition is really important. It's got to be something you study daily. And I think anytime you get an opportunity to get insight, one good way is when an individual comes to work for your organization and they've been working for another organization. They're going to bring a body of knowledge with them, not necessarily proprietary knowledge, but knowledge that's going to tell you the culture and character and approach that competitor takes. So I think knowledge is key here. Actually, knowledge may be the currency of leadership, which is kind of interesting to think about, but really in the competitive environment, knowledge is critical.
Carol?
I grew up in a very competitive environment in architecture, and it's all about going in and winning over the other firms. And you're not necessarily the ideal firm at the time. I loved understanding the competition and analyzing the competition, and then putting together a team. And in one instance, to win a huge contract with Johns Hopkins University for their hospital system, a whole master plan and a redo of the whole facility. I analyzed the competition, knew them pretty well. I put together a team where we teamed up we joined with another local firm there in Baltimore, a firm that was unheard of because we hated each other, that we would work together. I went and convinced them that we would be stronger and that we would win the job if we went together. And we did. And we won out over all of the other teams. So I love putting that together and being competitive. But you do have to be very thoughtful, and you have to understand your competition in every field that you're in, and you'll win.
Well, and related then to staying competitive, we talked about creativity as being one way that you can stay competitive, but one of the other ways is just being competent, being good at what you do, I suppose. And so just wanted to have you talk about that particular competency as well, that aspect of the model. What does it mean to be competent? When has that been beneficial? It's sort of, maybe it's self-evident, but talk just a little bit more for us about competence, what that looks like, what's its role in leadership. And Harold, maybe we'll have you start on this one, if that's okay.
Well, going with competence, I think that you need also to have confidence in yourself, self-confidence. I used in that film interview an example of being in Washington, about 3 months out of Texas A&M, and acting as a liaison for my firm with our clients. And when we had made the presentation after Mrs. Kennedy had approved the project, and we had made the presentation to all the users of the building so we could get approval and have a press conference, we hit a snag right at the end with this court system that said, no, it doesn't work for us. I had the confidence in myself, even though I was just out of school, was not a licensed architect, to sit down and redo that building over a weekend. And I had the confidence in my boss, a kid he never looked at my resume and never realized that I was just out of school. Convinced that he did, otherwise he would never put me in front of the judges. But I made the presentation to the courts of the big federal courts and the judges, and they excused us, they deliberated, they called us back in and said, Mr. Adams has remembered every detail that we required, and we approve it unanimously. So you've got to have not only the competence to do that, but the confidence that you have that confidence.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
I think competence comes with preparation, and competence comes with knowledge and working to prepare. I've seen people that are 30 and 40-year professionals that you would think are highly competent that I would define as marginally competent, if not incompetent. And then I've seen people that are right out of school who just right away you get the feeling that they're competent, that they know a way to get it done. And I think I'll share an anecdote with you, that an early out of school anecdote, because it may relate well to you guys too. I was very young in my days at CRS, and for some reason they thought I knew a whole lot more about calculating fees for big international projects than I really knew. In those days, we had floor-to-ceiling chalkboards. We didn't, it was pre-whiteboard, to tell you how old I am. And one night I said, man, I don't know how to calculate this fee, but I'm just going to get up in the upper left-hand corner of that chalkboard and I'm going to start writing. And sooner or later, as I started analyzing this and putting it together, I'm going to get to the lower right-hand end and I'm going to have it figured out. And so I did and put together what I thought was the best process for analyzing a situation, if not the final product. And my partners came in the next morning, many of which were 25, 30 years older than I did, and they had this aha moment of, wow, we didn't think about that. Yeah, sure, that makes sense. Yeah, well, that's the way to break it all out. Yeah, those formulas seem to work. And boy, we're really glad we hired you. You sure are smart in calculating fees. And I was going, well, yeah, I guess I am. But the reality was I just thought my way through it because I had an excellent education from Texas A&M. I had prepared myself for the job that I was in to the best of my ability. And I displayed competence and I displayed competency, which is a lot in how people perceive you. There's no shortcut, though. And I always say you define a leader. One simple definition of a leader, will somebody follow them? Will somebody anywhere follow them? If they are, they're a leader. Well, rarely will people follow someone who doesn't display competency. So how you carry yourself and how you project that and how you draw on the number of resources and knowledge you built in your career is really important, because you're going to get cast in situations. My amigos and I get cast in situations today where we really don't know when we walk into it how we're going to solve it. So we have to draw on our experiences. We've got a few more than you do. We have to draw on those things and the processes we learn and begin to display competency. Then the people that are looking to us for leadership will say, yeah, I get it. And I think maybe one other seminal definition is a leader knows what he doesn't know. And so at some point it's okay to say, hey, Jim, I really don't know about that. Do you know something better about this to contribute to this? So our broadened competency occurs as a team. We're going to talk about collaboration. It occurs as a team. It doesn't have to occur in one person. The whole idea of the smartest person in the room we've seen fail over and over again. So competency really is embodied in how you project yourself, how you draw on others, and how you prepare.
I think the devil is in the details, as he's heard before. Just like Carol mentioned, that he had remembered everything that they had told him about, and he paid attention. Fortunately, most of the time, your competitors may not pay attention to the details, and that's why you're going to be ahead. When I was a junior estimator for a big construction company back in 73 or 74, I just finished doing all of the takeoff on a 52-story building. Every single thing in it had quantified it, and me and the chief estimator, he had put the unit prices on it. We were pricing it in-house. We weren't taking bids. So me and the chief estimator went in front of the division manager, the vice president, and the first thing he asked me, as the guy who did all the takeoff, he said, did you leave off a floor? And I looked at him like, no sir, I don't think so. I was not confident whether I had left off a floor or not. The point being, they're not all architects are funny about this. They don't always number them 1, 2, 3, 4. They may skip floor 13.
Always.
They may, there may be a mezzanine. The first floor may be the ground floor. And if you just automatically assume some of these things, it has happened to contractors before where they actually did not quantify one of the floors. And on a 52-story building, it was about a $52 million project. It's $1 million a floor. So I went back and double-checked myself. Sure enough, I had not done that. But I didn't have the confidence that Harold was talking about to go along with my competence that I needed to have. And I never let that happen again. I made sure that I double-checked everything. So when I walked in there, I was very careful and confident of everything I had done. So pay attention to the details.
Yeah, there's some interesting statistics I saw in the past that 90% of people going into a presentation or a key moment in their lives won't prepare, and 5% won't rehearse. So you're in the top 5% if you just do those two things. You'll prepare yourself fully and you'll rehearse, as Jim talked about with his team. You put yourself in the top 5%. I'll take those odds every day, twice on Sunday. You know, but it's hard to get people to put the work in, because to prepare and to rehearse requires you to put the work in, and competency requires you to put the work in. There's no shortcut to getting there. So you can separate yourself, put yourself in that 5% elite if you'll just do those things.
Thank you. Well, and building off of some of the other comments that were offered earlier, especially by you, Bill, you talked about how competence, while it's important, is not just isolated to one person. That one thing that we have to do is be able to try to harness as much competence as we can from a number of different people in the team included, as you mentioned, Carol. So let's talk a little bit about collaboration then, and the role that that plays in leadership. Maybe you could talk about some good and bad examples that you've seen of collaboration as well, and again, kind of how we can visualize what that has looked like for you in your career. So if I could have, Harold, if I could have you start off with that, talk a little about collaboration.
Happy to. I'm a great believer in collaboration. In fact, I've established 4 professorships here at Texas A&M and the College of Architecture, trying to encourage more collaboration, because each discipline thinks they know it all, and they're not working together. The reality is that when you get out of school, it's all about collaboration. And so collaboration, as far as I'm concerned, is number one. We were working on a project, very, very complex project. I was the executive architect on the project for the U.S. Capitol. This is the big visitor center underground on the east side of the Capitol. It took some 22 years to get this project to the point that it was finished, because it was in and out of budgets and various problems developed along the way, including 9/11 and then anthrax and many other things that added to the complexity of the project. When we finally get the project approved, a go-ahead for contracting, I went to our client, the architect of the Capitol, and said, I think that we need more than just the architecture engineering team on this project from the beginning. We must have the contractor. We must have construction manager involved from the beginning. We must have the individuals or the company that's going to design the exhibits so that we have no surprises. Encourage them. They got the approvals, and it's not easy in the government system to do that. But we pulled together the team. We helped them interview and select the teams. They all came on board. And believe me, the project would have never happened if we had not had that kind of collaboration between the construction firms and the architects and the engineers and all the other players in that project. So collaboration is number one. It is something that often you see teams that just fall apart because there's nothing but infighting. They don't have respect for each other, and they turn into disasters. So collaboration is vitally important. And if you look at the successful businesses today, anywhere, they all have broken down those walls and they're working together, respecting various skills that are brought to the table, especially in the Silicon Valley type companies and in Austin and other places where you see these very, very creative companies that are bringing new products on the market all the time. That's done through a lot of collaboration.
Thank you. Jim?
I thought about it, I don't know if y'all have, but there is a difference between collaboration and cooperation. Anybody thought about that? Cooperation can be a very passive thing. You can cooperate with somebody by not doing anything. Collaboration is an active process where you work alongside others. And I think, if Harold didn't mention it, I've heard him mention it before, with all levels of expertise, okay? We in construction, we've got to work with the blue-collar folks and the white-collar folks. We got to be able to communicate with both of them, and we got to be able to collaborate with both of them. Architects, engineers, office managers, building managers, fire marshals, building inspectors, subcontractors, come from all different backgrounds, and if you're going to be successful, you got to collaborate with all of them if you're going to have a really good project. So know the difference between cooperating and collaborating. There is one.
Bill?
I think it's kind of funny we all keep saying, well, that's number one. Well, that's number one. There's actually 8. They're all equal, I think.
When I said that, I realized that.
Several number ones. Everything we do, everything you do is done in a team environment. You're on teams here. I mean, it's just a way of life. It's your family's a team. Everything you do is in a team environment. Emphasis on mutual trust and respect is important. I think as you start to collaborate, it's really critical to lay down the guidelines on how the team's going to work. I once went through an exercise I think has been very valuable to me to ask the people that I work with, how do they best receive communication? Well, one person would say, I like a handwritten note. I worked for a CEO who always wanted a handwritten note. He would never respond to an email or a text message, but a handwritten note, you get an answer just like that. Or some people never listen to voicemail messages, or they don't read their emails, or they get to them days later. So I think understanding how people process information is really critical to collaboration. Understanding how to trust the other person and respect the other person, regardless of whether they're blue collar or white collar, or they're your client, or they're your subcontractor or sub. How to get to candor and transparency with your group you're working with. Because if you've ever been in a team, raise your hand if anybody on the team didn't pull their weight. All of us, right? I mean, so what do? You know, how do you deal with that? And how do you bring people along and interface with people in that environment? Your interpersonal skills. I will tell you, sometimes in the kind of projects Harold spent his career on, I've had a chance to work on several. You might have 30 or 40 contracted entities working on the same project. So if you're not collaborating, if you're not communicating, and today we've got all these high technology platforms for program management, and everybody can have their SharePoint site, and they can all, but that all washes away if you're not building an attitude of trust and respect and making sure that people, all the people involved are included. It's an inclusive process. It's all about making effective decisions. Everything we do is about making effective decisions. At the end of the day, if you broke down what we do in our industry, it's about helping our client make the best informed decisions they can make. To do that, we've got to collaborate. And as I said earlier, don't be the smartest person in the room. You know, it's funny because I've seen leaders where they are the least intellectually smart person in the room, but everyone really respects them because they're pulling everyone's ideas and they're assimilating, and they're almost like a process manager. I think leaders sometimes are great process managers, and then you get to the best outcome. And so I think collaboration is as much attitude as it is anything else, and it takes work. It could be number one. We'll just say that they all are equal.
Let's talk about another number one aspect of leadership in here. Maybe I'll talk about courage last, actually. I want to talk about community, actually, a little bit after this. We talked about collaboration, what that means, and then there's community that's in this model as well. How would you define community? What does that mean, and how is that potentially even different from collaboration? How would you, again, define, and what are some examples of community? And if I could start with Bill on this one, if that's okay.
Sure. Well, we all are a part of a community. We live and work in a community. We're privileged to, my amigos and I are privileged to work in an environment where what we do gets seen. You walk through the environments we create, so there's an obvious sense of community. But we all work in populations of people. We all have various stakeholders, and the concept of who is a stakeholder and what roles do people play in a project or a process is important. It's one of the first things we try to do when we launch a new project is actually do a stakeholder map. You know, who are the stakeholders? Well, let's say we're building a major new project on the West Loop in Houston, and you've got the neighbors in the neighborhood, you've got the other property owners, you've got the city as a stakeholder, the county's a stakeholder, the utility companies are stakeholders, the people who are going to be tenants in the building, the people who are going to stay in the hotel rooms. They're all stakeholders. So in everything you do, you want to touch and consider the impact of your decisions on these various stakeholders. It's not always easy to do. I know when we were working on Washington National Airport, and we were doing what became Reagan Airport, I had the privilege of being the principal of that project. And at one point, we had 98 special interest groups that would come to meetings. We'd have to go rent a ballroom in one of the hotels when we'd have our meetings to review the design. And you know, there's people from Save the Spotted Newt to, you know, people that didn't like the airplane noise to everyone else that would show up and they'd want to voice their opinion. And our guys would sometimes get sort of frustrated and they'd say, no, wait a second. Each one of those, as absurd as some of them may seem, are stakeholders. They've got a stake in this. so understanding the concept of stakeholders helps you build community, and once you build community, then you make better decisions that are more inclusive rather than exclusive. We can all cite examples of leaders who are not inclusive. They're exclusive. They just sort of bulldoze their way through life. I think the great leaders, if you go back and look at them, are terribly inclusive in what they do and understanding this sense of community. I think it's also important to understand that there's a key inflection point in all of our lives when we make a shift from success to significance. And it hits all of us at various points in our lives. But when you make that shift to what you're doing, being the significance of it being as important as the success that arises out of it, and I think we've really hit a peak of leadership, a high point of leadership. And so understanding that balance also helps us set a context for community.
Thank you. Carol?
Community to me is all the environment that you're living in. I was deeply involved in the community of my profession. In fact, organized some 35 years ago an organization of all of our competitors, the 50 largest architecture engineering companies in the country and in the world, a large firm roundtable. I wanted to meet them. We were all dealing with the same problems, the same issues, and pulled together the CEOs of those companies, and that organization is still running. I chaired it for the first 17 years. It's down as fourth generation, fourth leader, still going forward. So there's one community, certainly a community that I lived in and competed in. And it was interesting to see out of that how there were mergers that occurred, there were joint ventures where you thought they were the enemy. You found that by going together on a project, you could do a lot more. So there are many things that came out of that. It's your community that you live in. You know, it's being involved in your religious organization, it's being involved in the Chamber of Commerce, it's being involved in local boards. It's amazing how that helps you grow. You see other people, other successful people. It gives you the exposure to other problems that you start dealing with. I got deeply involved in community in Baltimore. Started one step at a time, serving on boards of my kids' schools, and then getting involved in the YMCA, and then someone asked me to get involved in some economic development issues. Got involved in the economic development. Was on the board of the Greater Baltimore Committee, and was the president of the Economic Development Council of that group. All of those projects, all those involvements in communities, giving time, but you're getting back a lot more than you realize. You're making connections. You're making you're learning by seeing other people and their jobs and getting exposure. This led the being involved in the Greater Baltimore Committee and being the president of the Economic Development Commission. Led to my being invited to join the first public board. I was invited to come on the board of Legg Mason because they wanted someone. We had already broken into the international marketplace, and they wanted someone on their board that knew something about the global marketplace. And that led me to be on 2 other public company boards that I served on them until I was age limited out. One of which I served 26 years. Those were incredible growing opportunities, very, very different businesses. So community can really mean a lot. And the more you get out and give of your time, the more you will benefit.
Can I cap on that before you go, Jim? Just one interesting thing. Tom Bullock, who you knew and will remember fondly, was the chairman of CRS, which was one of the largest architecture design firms in the world. I was a young guy emerging in that company. He came down to me one day. He said, "I want you to serve on our PAC political action group." And I looked at him and said, "Tom, I don't have the time to do this." He said, "Well, it's probably time for me to have my fireside chat with you." He pulled me aside and he said, "I'm going to tell you something. The more you give back, the more time you find. The the more you give back, the more you will find. And I will tell you that that has served me so well through my entire career, that it's funny how we manage those 24 hours a day we have is really key. But the people who give back seem to find the time to do it, because none of us get any more or less, right? We get the same, I think it's 168, so right number in a week. We all get the same. So it's how we manage that time. And being a part of community and giving back will free you up to just become a lot more efficient and other things. And by the way, you might get some clarity of thought on those boards that you bring back to your business too. So just want to share that anecdote.
Yeah, please. Do you have anything else to add?
Anybody know, yeah, sure, briefly, anybody know the mission statement of Texas A&M University? And it's not to provide you an education. Develop leaders of character dedicated to the greater good. What is the greater good? It's the things my compadres have been talking about. It's helping others. It's volunteerism, obviously being a part of your trade association. You know, leadership is simply about influence, and the more people that you come in contact with that influence you in a positive way, and the saying it works both ways, it will add to your personal and your business resume in a positive way. All of us, I'll tell you, this is the greater good. We enjoy doing this. We drop things that I'm supposed to be, and I know they're busy too, but I was supposed to be in a bank board meeting in Dallas, and I called the CEO of the bank, and I'm chairman of the committee. I said, I really want to go do this, but you're paying me to be at the meeting. What do you think? And he's a TSIP, and he said, Jim, this is where you need to be, about leadership and talking about these values that we're talking about today. That's what really matters, your character. And nobody cares how smart you are or what your intellect is or what your talent is. They really want to know what kind of person you are in your personal behavior. And one way I measure people is not by what they do at work, but I want to know what they do when they're not at work. What are they involved with? Did they start an A&M club? Did they get on the school board? Are they volunteering down at the soup kitchen? That's what makes a complete person.
Well, also those TSIPs need for Aggies to develop their leadership skills, because they need leaders. You know, there's plenty of followers over there. They need leaders.
Well, and we'll talk about sort of another defining characteristic of leaders then that's included in the model, and that's courage. A lot of your comments have reflected on some level of courage and some of the things you did as you were young employees, as you were put in various situations that required courage. Could you talk a little bit more about that? Talk about courage and the role that plays in leadership, the role that that's played in your careers as well. Jim, we'll get you started on this one.
Yeah, there's lots of ways to define it, and it's usually doing something that you really know is extremely difficult and hard for you to do, but it's the right thing to do. Just like when I mentioned to you, if 6 of you are sitting in your dormitory room and whatever, and 5 of them want to go do something that's stupid, and you say, no, we're not going to do that, that's not right, okay? That takes courage to do that when you're outnumbered by your peers. Stand up for what's right. And when I pulled out on the runway when I was in the Air Force, and my instructor said, you're ready to solo, and I was taking off in a supersonic jet, I pulled out on the runway, and I didn't think that at that time was scared to death whether I was going to make it or not. But that's not really courage, okay? That's not what I'm talking about, doing something that's kind of dangerous necessarily. It can be stupidity. But doing things that are the right thing to do when you're outnumbered. And we signed my first job when I first started my company. I bid a project. It was a $3.2 million job to do 132,000 feet, 6 floors in a building, tear it all out and put it back in 13 weeks. It really was an 18-week job. And the reason we got the job is we agreed to the schedule, and we agreed to the $800,000 penalty if we didn't get done on time. I was worth about the house, everything thrown in, the dog and everything. I was worth probably about $300,000 when I took on this job. So it would have bankrupted me if we didn't do it. So it took, I think, a little bit of faith and courage on my part to say, well, I know we can do this. We've got good people. We got a good plan. We got 30 subcontractors that are loyal to us, and we're going to do it. And we did. We made it happen. So you're going to have opportunities like that.
I think the good litmus test for an act of courage is, does it make your heart race a little bit when you consider what you got to do? If your palms get a little sweaty, if you get a little nervous in your chair, if your heart starts to beat a little faster, if your mouth gets a little dry, then you're probably going to need to draw on courage to help you make that decision. When I was 26 years old, I'd only been out of graduate school a couple of years, I was working for an individual that actually was instrumental in me getting my first job out of school, and discovered in a way that was kind of bizarre that he was doing some things that were not appropriate in the company. And I wrestled with it literally for weeks. I was hurt by it. I was didn't know what to do by it. And I finally decided, after a lot of thought and prayer, lots of prayer, that I was going to go to the chairman of the company and tell them what I knew, and that would draw on his wisdom to make the right decision. And when I did, and he thanked me for having the courage, which is the word he used, to come forward and bring the point forward, which, by the way, resulted in the guy that got me my job getting fired, which was a terrible outcome. He looked at me and he said, "Bill, integrity is like virginity. You get it once and you lose it once. You can't go get it back." And he said, "You just displayed the highest level of integrity and courage doing what you did at a young age." And he said, "It puts you on my radar screen for leadership because of the way you displayed that courage." So I think that there will be so many times in your life, whether it's terminating an employee, we've all had to do that. I've had to do it with employees that were 40 and 50-year employees of organizations. It was the right thing to do for the organization. It was a terribly difficult thing to do, to sit there and tell somebody that you changed their life. I remember one morning I was in Madison, Wisconsin. I knew I was going to have to do a termination that day, and I was driving to work, and I was thinking, the fellow that I'm going to terminate today, every day for the last 40-some-odd years, has kissed his wife, gotten in his car, drove the same way to work, showed up at the same office, and in a moment, and literally a moment, because the way these things go, there's an HR director there, and you're there, and you deliver the message, and then in a moment, that guy's life is changing. And I'm the one delivering the message. You have to have courage when you're a leader to do what you know is right, and built on all those other characteristics that allow you to make the right decision. But there are just so many situations. Being put in a compromising situation on sharing confidential information. Everything you deal with in the future is going to have some degree of confidentiality. How do you have the courage to know what you can and can't share, what you can talk about, you can't talk about? I think someone mentioned it earlier, but just having the conviction to do what's right. If you don't have a strong moral rudder, boy, develop one, because you're going to need one, and a strong faith to be able to lead, because it's going to come up more times than you imagine that you're going to need to draw on your courage.
I want to pick up on something Bill said. Firing people is the most difficult thing, and it takes more courage than you can imagine. I can still remember firing the very first person that had to fire. It was an incompetent secretary when I was in Washington, and every person I've ever had to do that had to terminate. It's taken courage. But the example I used in the interview on the film was the courage to step forward. And I was a junior guy. I was not even an owner yet of the company that I had joined, but they'd hired me to do a job, and they were in financial difficulty. And to go into the 4 partners that each owned 25% of the company, and to tell them they had to turn over their credit cards, their office credit cards, because we had a crisis of cash flow, and I would give them back whenever I kept a chart on my wall, a red line and a black line, and I said, when the black line goes above the red line, we can have a conversation about getting your credit cards back. That took a lot of courage, let me tell you, because they figured all they can do is fire me. And all along your life, there are going to be very difficult decisions where you have to deal with a difficult employee or an employee with a problem, maybe be drinking or some other thing that you have to deal with. all of that takes a lot of courage. So it involves your character, it involves everything that you're about.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Well, our discussion so far has been focused on these different elements of the C8 model. What I'd like to do just with the last few minutes that we have is just let you offer any last bits of advice that you'd like to give to our students here. We're obviously helping you develop this model, but each of these students are also going to be leaders in their own profession, the HR profession. And so any advice that you would have for them as Aggies, as future leaders in their field, we'd love to hear that from you. So if I could go ahead and start with you, Harold, and then we'll just move and conclude with Jim on that.
Yeah, it's a problem with having a name like Adams that starts with an A.
We're used to it.
I've always been the first one to be called out. Ever since elementary school, you know, was in the front row and always got the first question. My advice to you is, first of all, HR is a great field to go into. It can go in many different directions. There's more and more demand because dealing with all the laws and with all the sensitivities of people, you're dealing with their lives. And so that certainly the more you can open your mind and you can learn, and you can learn about different businesses, because you never know what industry you're going to go into. Learn as much as you can. I give a number of lectures here in the college, and one that I do on global culture and ethics is we have more business school students than we have architects or engineers in that class. Read, get involved. The great thing about A&M is there's so many organizations. The more you can get involved in other organizations, get involved in SCONA, get involved in the former Students Association, try to go in and become an ambassador there. There are many different things you can be involved in here. And get to know the foreign students. The foreign students are great resources of knowledge. There's too much segregation. Each foreign student goes off with their group. Get to know them, understand where they're coming from, because you'll be in a global organization. Almost every organization today, small and large, is operating on a global basis, whether you realize it or not. So reach out, get involved in a lot of different things. Take advantage of the opportunity that you have here at Texas A&M.
First thing I tell you is you are a brand, whether you recognize it or not. And so how you package, present, and promote that brand is critically important. I'd love for Harold to have time to tell his story about Dress for Success, because it's a great story that's on his video if you watch the video. But people draw a brand impression of you, and you can either plan and manage that brand impression, or you can be what I like to call an accidental brand. And I don't think you want to be an accidental brand. I think you want to manage that brand impression, and you want to see yourself as a brand. So let me give my 2-minute soapbox sermon. Be careful what you put on social media. You've heard that over and over again. But I heard just last week a very close friend of mine who's a C-level CEO of his company disqualified a candidate for a key position because they researched that person's Facebook page and came up with things that they felt weren't representative of what they wanted that position to reflect. So be careful what you put out there. Don't be shy about dressing for success. You know, go prepared. You know, if you suit up and look good, goes a long way towards people perceiving that you embody these characteristics that we've been talking about today. But don't ever forget that you're a walking, talking brand, and you start establishing those brand impressions from almost day one. And you can shape that. You can really manage and shape that just like companies shape brands, to see yourself as a brand and a brand statement. And don't be afraid to be different, and don't be afraid to make a strong brand statement. Could you share briefly your anecdote about Dress for Success? Do we have time?
Yes, we do.
Well, I'm convinced I would have never been invited to go with my boss to meet with the First Lady, Jackie Kennedy, if I hadn't been properly dressed. So I'm a great believer in being properly dressed. I realize that today the world is more casual than what I grew up in, but be prepared. Take a jacket or a more formal outfit and keep it at the office. You never know when that opportunity will present itself. Gave a talk a few years ago to the construction science students and the whole student body of construction science. And it was in February, and they were all dressed like they were ready to go hunting. They had camouflage jackets and camouflage hats. And I looked out, and I had a suit and tie on, and I said, you know, I realize I'm a different generation, I'm a little stiff. I'll take my jacket and my tie off if you'll all remove your hats. Looked out, turned around, and took my coat off and my tie, looked across. There wasn't a baseball cap, hunting cap in the audience. The professor still asks me, how did I do that? They've been trying to do it for years. So, you know, and then I gave them an example of where it led me by being properly dressed, and the importance of presenting yourself as someone that can be a leader, that can be identified by your boss as a leader, and that they will invite you in and be proud of you.
Jim.
I'm always last. I want to make it a little simple. Does everybody know what the crest on this ring stands for? The protection of the reputation of Texas A&M. And that is all of our responsibility. And you have a lot to live up to. There's a hell of a legacy behind us and behind y'all that has been established. And that when you look down at that ring, remember that. You're protecting the reputation of Texas A&M. And as I told you before, remember my formula, V plus A equals C. Values plus your actions determine your character. And if you have good character, you will be unlimited in what you can do in your career and in your life. And as most of these are going to be HR type, you're going to be looking for people, not always the most talented or the most high intellect, but look for the ones with good character. Okay? And some of them may be leaders, and some of them may be followers. But they all must have good character, or they won't be a good part of your team.
Great. Well, I think that we can all agree that we've been well fed by the advice and by the insights we received there, and of course by Fuego as well. So it's been a good morning so far. We want to thank again Jim and Bill and Harold.